I just noticed something, that a footnote to what we said yesterday. We're talking about Shira, and we said that at the crossing of the sea, the angels were told that they could not say Shira, praise to Kodesh Baruch Hu, and we did in the Song of the Sea, and later generations we couldn't also. And on the night of the Seder, we do say Shira twice. We say Hallel in Shul and Tahal at the Seder. But as Rabbi Meisman pointed out, the Egyptian firstborn were dying, and the reason that Shira was prohibited to the angels was because the work of my hands are drowning in the river. Here, the work of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's hands are also dying. So we said that there are two aspects of Shira. One is praise and one is thanksgiving. And the fact that Hakadosh Baruch Hu's creatures are dying prevents praise, but it doesn't prevent thanksgiving. So the angels who were only expressing praise could not do that. We who at the sea have our lives saved and our enemies drowned, we could say because it was thanksgiving. Later generations of Jews who weren't there would only be praising. They can't do that. When the night of the Exodus was occurring, and they were making the first Seder, so they were being saved. So even though the Egyptian firstborn were dying, they were being saved. So for them it was also thanksgiving, so they could say the Shira. What about later generations? How are we able to say Shira when we weren't there? Just like later generations on the seventh day of Pesach can't say Shira for what happened to their ancestors at the sea, we also shouldn't be able on the first night of Pesach to say Shira for what happened to our ancestors when they left Egypt. And the answer, which Rabbi Meisman pointed out, is that what we said in the previous page. In every generation, a Jew has a responsibility to see himself that he went out of Egypt. So on the contrary, later generations of Jews did go out of Egypt. It's personal, and therefore it is thanksgiving. And thanksgiving is permissible even when Hakadosh Baruch Hu's creatures are dying. That's what we said. Now I want to point out two things here on page 47, which we started yesterday. The top of the page, the first paragraph, therefore it is our duty to thank, praise, pay tribute, etc., and claim him who performed all these miracles for our fathers and for us. The text stresses that. It's not just historical, but we also participate. That's what it says in this paragraph. And then if you go to the bottom of the page, the blessing that we make after the two chapters of Psalms, it says, "Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors." Again, the same emphasis, that it is we together with them, not just they as a historical event. That's one thing I wanted to point out. And the other thing I wanted to point out, at the end of this paragraph, which is the blessing after the two chapters from Psalms, from Hallel, it says, at the very end, just before the Baruch, "V'noda lecha shir chadash al gulasenu v'al p'tus nafshenu." Now, noda means to thank. It's not a verb for mishabeach, it's a verb for thanking. Also for acknowledging, but here it's not, it's thankfulness. So here it's noda shir. We're thanking you through shir. So this shows you that shir also contains thankfulness. Just as I showed you from the first verse of the Song of the Sea, where the root shir appears 3 times, and the first 2 times Onkelos translates it as shabach and tishbachta, and the third time he translates it the shabach v'nodi, will praise and give thanks. So that phraseology in Onkelos is exactly the phraseology you have here at the end of this blessing, and it confirms again the idea that part of Shir is thanksgiving, and supports Rabbi Masum's analysis. Okay, that's the footnote that I wanted to mention to you. Now, in between here we have the first two chapters of Hallel, Psalms 113 and 114. Right. Usually, when you say Hallel, you say a blessing beforehand, especially in the holidays. On Rosh Chodesh, some do and some don't. Svarim typically don't, because that's what the Mechaber says in the Shulchan Aruch. Some Hasidim, like Boston Hasidim, don't say also. But here it's Yom Tov. So why isn't there a blessing at the beginning? So some want to say that it's because of the interruption, because we're going to say two before the meal, and we're going to finish it after the meal. But let's put it this way. What about those of us who say Hallel sometimes without a blessing? Like Rosh Chodesh for us, or the last days of Pesach. After the first day we don't say a bracha anymore, because it's only Chatzi Hallel. Is it permissible to interrupt when you don't say a blessing? No, it isn't. So how is it that we say two paragraphs of Hallel before the meal and the rest of Hallel after the meal? That's a pretty substantial interruption, isn't it? But not if you use the theme that we've mentioned at least 10 times already, that the mitzvah of the evening is not to tell the story. The mitzvah of the evening is to relive the events. When they sat down to eat the Paschal sacrifice and the matzah and the bitter herbs in Egypt before they left, what was their attitude? What was their experience? Weren't they full of thanksgiving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's saving them from Egypt and killing their enemies? So for us, the meal and the expression of praise and thanksgiving go hand in hand. They're part of the reliving. So if you surround the meal with the praise and thanksgiving, you then make the meal into reliving what they experienced. And in that respect, it's not an interruption. So you can use that idea here again. Now, I want to take you through the first paragraph, because I think there's a very, very deep message in the first paragraph. This is based on the verses, using some passages in the oral tradition to explain them. First of all, this Psalm 113 has 9 verses, which break up into 3 groups of 3. First, you have verses describing, praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Praise the servant, that's to say the servant should praise the name, from now and forever, rising the sun to setting, and Hashem should be praised. That's the first 3 verses, talking about praising God. The next 3 verses describe, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's position vis-a-vis the creation. High above all nations is Hashem, above the heavens is His glory, who is like Hashem, who is enthroned on high, yet deigns to look upon heaven and earth. And since in your common everyday English you don't use the word deigns, and I would imagine that 9 out of 10 people don't have a clue what it means. It means, even though I am a very great high position, and I'm very noble, and there are things that intrinsically are too small for me to take into account or to take interest in, doesn't matter, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to lower myself to pay attention to them. That's what dein means. And in the literal Hebrew, it means lowers himself. Mashpili. Mashpil means to lower. Your translator makes it a kind of social and spiritual lowering, but the literal verb means to lower, which means he's high above the whole of the creation. If you think that God lives in heaven, go to Norway and join those who believe in the ancient Norse gods or they live in Valhalla, they live in the heavens, or the Greeks who thought they lived at Mount Olympus. Because Baruch Hu is the creator of everything, doesn't live anywhere. He manifests himself, but doesn't live there. Anyway, those 3 verses describe where he is. The last 3 verses describe something he does. He raises the destitute from the dust, really from the dirt. And here I'll make a comment, which the word in Hebrew is afar. Afar means dirt or soil. Dust in Hebrew is avak. It's a different word entirely, and that's not what's used here. Very often English translators translate the word afar as dust. You got to sympathize with them. You don't want the Holy Book to be talking about dirt, do you? Especially in positive contexts. It just sounds, crude. Dust sounds poetical. The truth is the exact opposite. All life comes from dirt. All of it. Because everything depends upon plants, and plants grow in the dirt, which gives it nutrition. Dirt is wonderful. Dust is useless. The desert in southwestern United States is called the Dust Bowl because almost nothing grows there. But so it's dirt. So now he says, he raises the destitute from the dirt, from the trash heaps, he lifts the needy. Okay. Kodesh Baruch Hu does charity. Charity for those who are in great need. To seat them with nobles. Now the word in Hebrew connotes philanthropy, charity, generosity. And the nadiv is someone whose heart moves him to share with others. So now let's figure this out. The verse says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of the poor, the destitute, the needy, by seating them with the philanthropists. That's not an obvious comparison, obvious transition. Someone who's desperately poor, the opposite would be to make him rich, and that's would be the contrary, and the contradictory would be to make him not poor, which could mean comfortable. What's it got to do with philanthropy? Giving to others. How'd that get in? And then it says, he transforms the barren wife into a glad mother of children. Well, poverty is definitely a problem for people. Infertility is a problem for people, but there are lots of problems, aren't there? Why would King David pick out these 2 problems and say, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of, the poor and the infertile? How are they chosen out of all the problems that people have? So these 3 verses need some analysis. Now there is a Gemara. It says, 4 categories of people are nechshavim kemes. You have to be careful when you translate Chazal, to know the context, and you have to know the way they use words and concepts. If you look up nechshavim kemes in a dictionary and you're 9 years old, you'll read, it means they are accounted as dead. But it doesn't mean that. Not in English is not correct. It means they share some characteristic with those who are dead. Which means to say, in plain English, they're not fully alive. They're missing some essential ingredient of life. Not that you can bury them, if somebody shoots them, he's not guilty of murder, you can't count them for a minion. No, it doesn't mean that. It just means there's some feature that they're missing, which is an essential feature of successful life, and in that respect they are similar to the dead. What are the 4 categories? One is those who are poor. Second is those who are blind. The third is those who are childless. And the fourth is those who have tsaras, which is a skin condition which requires you to be a person to be expelled from the community and to dwell in isolation. Those 4 are classified by the Gemara as nechshavim kemes. They lack some essential ingredient of life. The poor, the blind, the childless, and the person who has tsaras. What feature do they have in common that is essential to full human life, and that they lack. And here's the answer that commentators give. What they lack is the normal range of capacity to do chesed, loving kindness to others. They lack the normal range. I didn't say they lack it altogether. I didn't say they don't have any. I said they lack the normal range of doing loving kindness to others. So, a person who has little money can be generous with his advice, can be generous by helping people with his body, helping move things, lift things. If a single or two people need a place to sleep overnight, he could offer it to them. But when you had the snowstorm in New York, and people came in their SUVs to the airport and took Jews to their houses for 36 hours and fed them and kept them there, and they took 20 or 30 or 40 trip after trip, a poor person can't do that. He hasn't got an SUV, and he hasn't got a place for 20 people. He can't give substantial charity because he hasn't got money. So there's a part of the range of normal loving kindness for others a poor person, especially a desperately poor person, cannot do. A blind person, well, blind people also can give advice, and even with today's technology, but the blind person can't take you out for a drive, and probably can't give you good advice on how to decorate your living room, although you can get some from books, but right, and can't tell you whether the traffic light is red or green to go or stop. There are a lot of things a blind person can't do and needs other people to do for him or her. Then you have, let's say, someone who's childless. Here, one part of the range of opportunities to do loving kindness is having recipients who need it. Well, when you will have children, you'll discover two things. Number one, of course, the children are totally dependent upon you. They won't survive, they won't flourish unless you are dedicated to giving to them. But you will also discover in yourself a capacity for loving kindness that you may not know that you could possess. One of our children had colic. A colicky baby can cry for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. You know, it may catch its breath for an hour to sleep and then it's crying. It's crying all the time. It's horrible for the parents. Your child is obviously suffering something. I don't know if they know what it is today, but in our time they certainly didn't know. And I put in stints of carrying the child on my back and singing to the child and playing music for the child to try to do something to relieve some of the pain and suffering the child was going through. Now, sometimes to people who have nothing to do, you say, get a life. I have a life, thank you. And I always had a life. I was doing things. I wasn't idle. And if I'm going to carry the child from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., it's going to be harder for me the next morning to function and to operate. And things that rob me of my sleep, typically, I try to avoid as much as possible. And when they happen, I try my best to quiet my resentment, but not when I'm carrying my own child. No resentment, no irritation, no hesitation. It's my child. I feel the pain the child is feeling, and I'm carrying the child, only hoping that I can relieve it to a certain extent. If before I was married, before I had children, you had told me that I was capable of that kind of loving kindness, I don't know whether I would believe you or not. But you discover through having children a depth of loving kindness that you possess. It isn't as I was trained in it, between getting married and the first birth. I got training in loving kindness. It's there. It has to be realized by circumstances that call for it as a response. So you learn through the total dependency of the children on you how much you can give. And then the person who has saras is totally isolated. He can't live in the company of other people. So he can't do any loving kindness to anybody else. So, if I would analyze that Gemara, the Gemara is telling me this. It's telling me that when you lack the normal range of capacities or circumstances for loving kindness, then you are not fully alive. And there are two different ways to lack. One way is you lack the means, and the other is you lack the opportunity. And then the Gemara gives two examples of each type. The poor person and the blind person lack the means. The childless and the Metzora lack the opportunity. And then if you'll ask me, well, why did King David choose the one of the pair that he chose? I could say it's because it's more common. Poverty is more common than childlessness, and childlessness, did I say it right? Poverty is more common than blindness. Poverty is more common than blindness, and childlessness is more common than being a Metzora. So now, back to King David. King David says, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing? He's caring for the impoverished, and he's caring for the childless. In what way is he caring for them? What is he doing for them in his care of them? Now let's go back to the thing that I asked at first. It says he takes the poor and places them with the philanthropists. We have to ask, what's the crippling element of being poor? What's wrong with being poor? Why did the Gemara say that a poor person isn't fully alive? Because as a poor person he can't give. The problem of the poor person isn't that he doesn't have resources. The problem of the poor person is that he can't add a room to his house. The problem of the poor person is not that he can't have steak for supper. The problem of the poor person is that he can't give. That's why it's a condition that needs help. That's why he's not fully alive. So Kadosh Baruch Hu gives to him so that he can become a philanthropist. That solves the problem of poverty. And the barren, particularly the barren mother, she doesn't have the resources to give. That's what's the problem in childlessness. So he gives her children. So, in a word, what is the Kodesh Baruch Hu giving to these people? So now if you put the whole thing together and get from A to Z, what comes out is that he's giving them life. He's giving them life. Let's rehearse it. They don't have the normal circumstances to do loving kindness. Doing loving kindness is an essential feature of life. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them is the circumstances to do loving kindness, by which he's giving them life. That's what King David is saying. It's not that they don't have enough money to go to the show, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides them money so they can go to the show. That's not the message King David is expressing. Why is it you think that loving kindness is an essential feature of life? Well, one of the things that we are told in the Torah, and the Rambam, among others, counts it as one of the 613 commandments, is that we have to develop godly traits. Mahu afata. Just as he is merciful, so you too should be merciful. Just as he is gracious, so you too should be gracious. Others continue like the Rambam, just as he is holy, so you too should be holy. You should be what he is. Well, now let's ask the question, what is the Kodesh Baruch Hu doing? What is he occupied with? Running the world. What's it for? It's all an expression of chesed. Olam chesed yibana. The world is created, maintained, managed, directed out of loving kindness. So if I have a responsibility to be like him, that's going to mean I have to practice loving kindness. Chesed is one of the Torah obligations that we have. So a person who lacks the normal range of opportunities to practice chesed can't implement being like a Kodesh Baruch Hu in this key respect. And therefore his life is not a successful life. It's not a complete life. Not as successful as it could be if he had the normal range of opportunities. So Kodesh Baruch Hu, by giving him that range of opportunities, is giving him life. Not breath, not nutrition, but spiritual life. the life of being a godly person. That's what King David is saying in these 3 verses, among other things. I would never say I got to the depth of a pasuk, but that's what he's saying. Are you with me? Is it clear what I'm saying? Okay. I got this only because I was inspired by the Ramchal. I'm going to change the schedule to calibrate it again. Ramchal really talks all of this out. 140. Let's see. Okay. Fine. Now, just a couple of other comments on this chapter. Then I'll go on to the next chapter. Then we'll go on to the meal. Yes.
What about matzoras? What matzoras like?
Tsaras is some kind of skin condition. They sometimes translate it as leprosy, but I'm told that medically it's not correct. And there are various phases, and they go one after another, and they're different with different types, and it's very complicated. But at a certain stage, he has to exit the city. Not only must he exit the city, but if somebody approaches him, he's got to call out to him, I'm Tameh, don't come close. That means he has to dwell in isolation.
How does it relate to childlessness?
Because he can't do loving chesed, loving kindness to other people. He's not connected with other people. It's just disconnected. Yeah, today there's SMS and other things. Okay. Maybe you won't believe me because you're addicted to your telephones, but there's a difference between talking to a person on a telephone and talking face to face. It's not the same. And if you don't know that it's not the same, I pity you. It means you're not having good conversations face to face. Okay, here's a little question. It says in the beginning of this psalm, praise the name of Hashem, now and forever. For the rising of the sun to its setting, Hashem's name is praised. Doesn't that look redundant? Now and forever sounds like all the time. Sunrise to sunset is only daytime. And it seems to even exclude nighttime. All right? It's a good question. I'm going to tell you the simplest possible answer, which I think is not very well known. So if you want to score points at the Seder, absolutely should mention this. Who says from the rising of the sun to its setting is temporal, chronological? Maybe it's geographical. Maybe it means from east to west. Not the time of sunrise in the morning to the time of sunset in the evening, but from east to west. Then it wouldn't be redundant at all. That shows you how what looks like an obvious question could have a pretty obvious, satisfactory answer.
But who says it from east to west?
Sorry?
Just to finish, so that we would be able to polish the point during Seder. Who says it from east to west, but not from morning to the evening? Like, question is clear, but like
who said the teretz? Where did I see it? I don't remember. But it is said. I didn't think of it myself. I wish I had, but I didn't. Okay, and then we said the thing in the middle. I'm not going to go into the whole philosophy there. Fine, let's go to the next paragraph. When Israel went forth from Egypt, Jacob's household from a people of alien tongue. Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. Wow, it's somehow very important that we were taken out of the land of people of an alien tongue. Why is that so important? And if you will remember, it's going back several weeks, if you go back to the Kiddush on page 21, the bottom paragraph, you see, blessed is Hashem, God, the King of the universe, who has chosen us from all nations, exalted us above all tongues, languages. So that's a blessing that was written by the rabbis. But here you have a verse which makes prominent the idea of being extracted from people of an alien tongue. What's the idea? What's the idea that the language is so important? Now I want to tell you a piece of my intellectual history. When I was in university and studying these subjects, we read about a French linguist, I think it was the beginning of the 19th century, who said, "Pity the poor English and be thankful that you're French, because the mind naturally thinks of objects and then their properties. The objects come first, the properties come second. In French, the noun comes first and the adjectives come afterwards. So the way we speak mirrors the way we think. But the poor English, in English, the adjectives come first and the noun comes at the end. And that's the opposite of the way you think. So the English are struggling all the time. They're confused all the time because their language disorients them with respect to the way they're supposed to think. Pity the poor English." Well, of course, the truth is, pity the poor French that they have a fool like that talking, right? He didn't dream that the language that you learn affects the way you think. And maybe, if it's even true of French people, that they think of objects first and quality second, it's because they grew up speaking French. And the English, who grew up speaking English, think of the qualities first and the objects second. Who told them that it isn't so? But what this illustrates is that the language you learn has an effect on the way you think. And that's pretty important. Your first language remains, for almost everyone, your most fluent language throughout the rest of your life. Even if you learn other languages, you're not fluent in them, and you often don't think in them. I studied French as an undergraduate in high school, 4 years worth, and then I became religious and I started to learn Hebrew. And for a long time, for me, there was English and foreign, because I kept confusing Hebrew and French. That's all that other stuff. That's all it is. And to this day, when I'm looking something up in the dictionary, Aleph is A, Beis is B, and I look for A, B, C. I count the letters. I don't think in Hebrew except when I'm speaking trivial things fast. Then maybe I do think somewhat in Hebrew, but otherwise, I'm always translating. So, what language you speak has an effect on the way you think. That's important. And we have certain sources that indicate that a child from the beginning should be taught Hebrew, whether it's his only language or together, because it does affect the way that you think. So here, it's important to be told, he took us out. One of the things he was doing is he was extracting us from a nation whose language is foreign to us, alien to us. Okay. Then, in the Hebrew, I'm just saying this because it took me a long time to get the right source on this. Look in the Hebrew. Haisa Yehuda Lakacho Yisrael Mam Shalosav. That's what he puts in his comma. Judah was his, what does he call it? His sanctuary, Israel his dominion. Now, it bothered me for many years. It says Haisa Yehuda. Judah was, but Haisa is feminine. Why would you want to treat Judah as feminine? The Malbim says, Gottleib, you're not punctuating it right. The correct punctuation is this: Haisa, colon. This was the situation. The word Haisa doesn't go on Judah, it goes on the abstract, the situation. And the situation was Yehuda Lakacho, Israel Mamshalo. Two aspects of the situation. One, Judah is a sanctuary, and Israel is a dominion. The Haisa doesn't go on Judah. I was glad that he said that. He obviously was bothered by my question, and he corrected my misunderstanding. Then it goes on. The sea saw and fled. The Jordan turned backward. The mountains skipped like rams. Hills like young lambs. What ails you, O sea, that you flee? Jordan, that you turn backward? The Hebrew is malachah. Ails is a little bit of an imaginative extension for the translator, but still, it's being treated by the psalm as unusual and needing an explanation. It's not normal that this should happen. And the answer that's given is before Hashem's presence, tremble, O earth, before the presence of the God of Jacob, turns back the rock to a pond of water, flint into a flowing fountain. It's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there with the Jewish people that the physical environment is so affected. That's what the verses in the Psalms say. Yeah, okay, there are lots of oral commentaries and supplements and everything else. The bones of Yosef, but here it's talking about Hashem's presence. The whole of the physical world is something that He creates, and when His presence is available, it registers it by being forced out of its normal mode of operation. The sea splits, the river, the Jordan, when the Jewish people cross the Jordan River, how do they do that? It's a moving river. Well, it stopped moving. And they went across while it was not, and according to the Malbim and others, the water piled up. It didn't disappear, it didn't evaporate. So that when they finally got across, and then the stoppage was removed, there was a tremendous crash of water, and the water was restored. So that's certainly unnatural. And there are certain midrashim about the mountains. At any rate, what the engine here that produces the difference is Kodesh Baruch Hu's presence.
Right.
Yeah.
Why is not written here that the God split the sea, but the sea saw and fled? Some guy like Jews had a private agreement with the sea, like they made a deal. Sea split. It's like sounds like a magic.
You know, that's a very nice observation. I never thought to think about that word, but it fits with a famous midrash that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the sea, this particular sea, He said, I'm making a condition with you that when the Jews need to go across, you'll split. When it was created, and had to agree to that condition, otherwise it wouldn't be created. That's something that had to happen. So now, I think this works very well. With that midrash, the sea observed the Jewish people approaching, and because of the condition that it had agreed to split, it split. A very, very nice connection. I didn't think of that. I think it's so nice, it's probably in the commentaries. It's just too obvious to miss, except that I missed it. Okay. And then the psalm ends. Not only is a question of the sea splitting and the river stopping and the mountain skipping, but Kodesh Baruch Hu turns stone into water. The natural world is no barrier to Kodesh Baruch Hu at all. Okay, I'll just say a few words about this. Now comes the meal. So, you wash your hands because you're going to eat bread, like you always do. Then, you make the motzi. And you make the bracha on matzah. And you eat. That's the first mitzvah of eating. Then you make the bracha on morah, and you eat the bitter herb, whatever it is. And then you have what is called the Hallel sandwich. The English reads, in remembrance of the temple, we do as Hillel did in temple times. He would combine. Now, he had the Paschal sacrifice, so he had that also. So some texts have in the word here Pesach and matzah and morah in a sandwich and eat them together because he read the following verse in a particular way. It says they shall eat it with matzahs and bitter herbs. You shall eat the Paschal sacrifice with matzah and bitter herbs. So now, you could say, what did you have for supper? Well, we had steak with potatoes and with green beans and with ice cream for dessert. Part of ice cream, right? The with doesn't have to mean, in English, simultaneously in the same mouthful. But, and indeed the Hebrew, al is ambiguous, multiply ambiguous. Al can mean on, al can mean above, Al can mean in addition to. So maybe it just means when you eat the Paschal sacrifice, eat matzah mora in addition to the Paschal sacrifice. I guess that's what the Chachamim understood it to mean. You don't have to make it a sandwich. Hillel read it, al meaning physically on top, so that you eat it as a sandwich. Fine. Here that the introductory title is Zecher LeMikdash Kehillel, remembering the Mikdash. Here, my Rabbi Zatzal said something, I think, very profound and very important. He said, we have two different titles for relating to the ancient temple. One is called Zecher LeMikdash, remembering the temple, and the other is Zecher LeChurban, remembering the destruction. And they aren't the same. Remembering the destruction, like we do on Tisha B'Av when we fast, or when we break a glass at a wedding, or as many do, they put ashes on the forehead of the bridegroom at a wedding, and we leave a square amma of wall if they build an apartment for a Jew. Not if you buy it for somebody else, you don't have to do that. But a square amma unfinished in the house. These are all signs of mourning for the destruction. Here, what we do at the Passover Seder, what Hillel did in the temple, we're not mourning for the destruction. Definitely not. And the phrase here isn't Zecher LeChurban, it's Zecher LeMikdash. So the deep idea here is that although the physical structure is destroyed, something of the essence of the temple still exists. And we can still access it. So we do now what Hillel did there to access the same spiritual reality that he was accessing when he did what he did. And that's part of our rejoicing. The responsibility to relate to the ancient temple is double. One is to remember the destruction and to mourn, and the other is to access that which is still available. And you have a number of things that we do that are Zecher LeMikdash in that respect, according to many, counting Sfira, counting the days between the first day of Pesach and Shavuos, the 49 days, since one of the triggers for counting it is the offering of a certain sacrifice, and we don't have that sacrifice. Many say that the biblical mitzvah to count doesn't exist, but we have a rabbinic mitzvah to do it. Why did the rabbis create that mitzvah? Because of a Zecher LeMikdash. They understood that somehow the ability to count those days is still available to us in the way it was or as an offshoot of the way it was in temple times. And therefore it's a way of accessing what's left. And it means there are two different ways to show how precious the ancient temple is for us. Number one, to mourn because of the loss, and number two, to treasure that which is left. And that's what's going on here with Korach. Okay, so now I will be here, Yetz Hashem, next week, Sunday and Monday. That's my end of my period of teaching for this